Alright, here we go. It is time to put those steps into practice. And we are going to go through a few of these together, and then I'll have you do a few on your own. So the first one, we have 2x squared plus 14x plus 24. Oh yes, and real quick, if you aren't using a pencil already, I at least think you should have one nearby because it will be very helpful. So anyway, back to the problem. Here is our problem. Now the first thing that we need to think about is the head of that robot. The first thing we always think about is there a GCF that I can factor out? And hopefully you can look at this and see that yes, there is. Especially because there's a number in front of that x squared. Right now we only know how to factor this if the x squared has a coefficient of 1. So that means we need to take something out of all three of these. If you need to, pause the video and write out the factors of each of them and find their common factor. But what I'm going to do is just go ahead and try one out. So I think that they are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide them all by 2. I think that that's my greatest common factor. So I know that I have a 2. That's where I put my GCF. 2x squared divided by 2. Well, those 2's will cancel, and that gives me an x squared. 14x divided by 2 gives me a positive 7x. And 24 divided by 2 gives me a positive 12. Now I just need to look real quick and see, is there anything else I can factor out of all of these? And no, there is not. So I've gotten the entire GCF out, which is great. So now that was step 1, was factoring out the GCF. Now we need to set up our parentheses and fill in the variables. So I'm going through the steps that we looked at on the front page. Step 2 is to write our parentheses. So if we need to bring down that GCF, that's going to be on the outside of our parentheses, and we fill in our variable. We see that we have an x squared here, so our variables are going to be x and x. So that's how we start factoring this. We do the GCF, parentheses. Now step 3 says to look at the signs. I'm going to leave a little bit of space here for some work. So step 3 says that we look at the signs and we determine what they'll be. So we need to come up here and look at these signs. We look at the signs once we factored out the GCF. So I'm going to look at the second sign first. Remember, we always start with the second sign. That is a positive. So what does that mean about the signs of our factors? That means they're going to be the same, either plus plus or minus minus. So we are going to have the same signs. Then we go and look at the first sign, and that tells us what our signs will be. We have the same signs and they will be positive because of that plus there. So we know we'll have x plus something and x plus something. Now step 4 says to find our factors. So we need to find the factors that will multiply to get 12 and add to get 7. So again, we look at this trinomial here after we have already taken out the GCF. So this is our C value, we put that at the top, and there's our B value. We need factors that will multiply to get 12 and add to get 7. So we write out the factors of 12. Well, to get 12, I can multiply 1 times 12. Excuse me. I can multiply 2 times 6. And I can multiply 3 times 4. Those are all of the factors of 12. So now I just need to try some. Ultimately, we want the pair of factors that's going to add to get 7. Now some people can just look at them and say, oh, I know which they will be. If you can't do that, that's okay, because sometimes they're tricky. So it's okay if you have to guess and check some, if you have to try them out. So this is where I want to use my pencil, because now I'm going to start and just plug them in, work them out, and see what happens. See if I get that 7x. Because again, we're multiplying to get 12, adding to get 7x. Usually what I do is start at the smallest pair, especially if the number that I'm adding to get is smaller. So I'm going to start with that 3 and the 4, and I'm going to go ahead and plug them in here. X plus 3, x plus 4. I am using a pencil because I don't know if those are going to be right, so I may have to do some erasing. So here comes George again, but the only part of George that we are going to use is the nose and the mouth, because what we want to know is, do these add up to get 7x? So I'm going to multiply the x times the 4, that gives me 4x. Multiply the 3 times the x, that gives me 3x. Now I add my like terms, and I have a 3x plus a 4x. Well, that gives me a 7x. Is 7x what I wanted? Yes, it is, because I have a 7x there. So that means that our 3 and our 4 are correct. Now, if you went ahead and tried 1 and 12 and plugged in the 1 and the 12, you would have gotten a 1x plus a 12x, which is 13x, which is not what we want. If you tried the 2 and the 6, then we would have a 2x plus a 6x, which gives us 8x. Again, that's not what we want. So even if you have to try multiple times, that's okay. You just need to guess and check. So we guessed, and then we checked it, and it ended up being correct. So now we can write out our answer. Number 5 is we write out our answer, and then we need to double check it. So we have 2 times x plus 3 times x plus 4. And before I box that out and say, yes, this is the answer, I want to multiply it out just to see if it's correct. So I have 2 times, I'm going to go ahead and distribute that out. So that's going to be x squared. We already said that when we distribute the x's to both of the constants, we get 7x. And then 3 times 4 gives us 12. Now if I distribute that 2 to each of them, I have 2x squared plus 14x plus 24. Is that what we started with? Yes, it is. We started with 2x squared plus 14x plus 24. So if I can multiply it back out and get the same answer, then I know that my factors are correct. So this is how we factor that trinomial. Now, does it matter which of these parentheses comes first? Would it be okay if I wrote 2 times x plus 4 times x plus 3? The answer is yes, that's fine. The order here doesn't matter. Remember, that's the commutative property. We can move these around because we're multiplying them. It doesn't matter what the order is. The thing that does matter is that the GCF is out front. We always want to put that GCF in the front. Alright, so I know this is a lot to take in, so just hang with me and let's look at another example. What if we have x squared plus 8x plus 15? Our first step is to check for a GCF. Is there anything I can take out of all 3 of these numbers? And the answer is no. There's no number in front that I can take out of everything, so there's no GCF. And you don't have to write that out, but I like to go ahead and write out all of my steps to make sure I'm covering all of my bases. So now step 2 is what? It is to draw the parentheses and fill in the variables. So there's no GCF to put in front, so I just have 2 pairs of parentheses with x and x. Then I need to go to step 3. And step 3, again, I'm going to leave a little room for space, a little room for work. Step 3 says look at the signs. So we go up here to our trinomial and we look at the second sign first. Well, the second sign is positive, so what does that mean? That means we are going to have the same signs. Then we look back at the first sign, and that tells us what both of our signs will be. So we know we'll have the same signs, and again, they will both be positive, just like in the last example. Now that we have identified our signs and written them in, we can go to step 4. And step 4 says to find the factors that work. So we have a little trial and error, a little guess and check here. We need to put the 15 here at the top. We are multiplying to get 15 and adding to get 8. So let's figure out what our factors of 15 are. To get 15, I can multiply 1 and 15. What else can we multiply? We can multiply 3 and 5, and that's actually it. Those are our factors of 15. So now at this point, we need to just try some. Again, if you're able to look at it and say, I know what they are, awesome. But still plug them in and try them. So I'm going to use my pencil here. Again, I usually start with the smallest of the factors, so I'm going to plug in the 3 and the 5. And now I want to try them just to make sure. So I'm going to multiply the x times the 5, and that gives me 5x. Multiply 3 times x, and that gives me 3x. Then I add up my like terms, and that gives me 5, 6, 7, 8x, and that is what I wanted. If you tried the 1 and the 15, you should have gotten a 1x plus a 15x, which is 16x, which is not what we want. So that 3 and the 5, those are what we want. And we just found that 8x. So now let's go to step 5 where we write out our factors and then we'll multiply them just to make sure. So we have x plus 3 and x plus 5. Now let's multiply them out just to make sure. So I multiply the x times the x, which gives me x squared. Then we multiplied, we already did this, the 3x and the 5x, and that gave us plus 8x. And then we multiply the 5 times the 3, and that gives us 15. Is that what we started with? Yes, it is. So again, we have the right factors, and we've just confirmed it. And let's do one more of these together, and then I'll have you do a few on your own. So the next one we have is x squared minus 2x minus 24. So again, our first step is to find a GCF. Is there anything that I can pull out of all of these? And the answer is no. So there's no GCF here. So that means we go straight to step 2, which is write the parentheses and fill in the variables. So I have my parentheses here, and I want to fill in my variables x and x. Now step 3. Hopefully you're starting to think ahead of me and maybe even right ahead of me as well as we go through these steps. Step 3, I'm going to leave a little room. Step 3 tells us to look at our signs. So let's go up to our trinomial. We have a negative sign here. A negative sign means that we're going to have different signs this time. Different signs. So I'm going to have one positive and one negative. Then we look at what is the first sign and what does that tell us. So we know we'll have negative, or we'll have different signs because it's negative, and we know that the bigger of the two factors is going to be negative. So our bigger number should go here. Our bigger number should go there. Now what do I mean by the bigger number? I mean once we find out what the factors are, just like we did here, when I plug them in, I should put the bigger one in that spot. So now let's go to step 4. That is finding the factors. So I want the two numbers that are going to multiply to get 24 and add to get 2. So now let's list out the factors of 24. We have 1 and 24. Oops, I just want a multiplication sign there. 1 and 24. Then we have 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. And if it takes you a few minutes to figure those factors out, that's okay. But the more that we get into this multiplication, the more practice we get, hopefully the better we will get at these. So now we need to plug things in. Usually I start at the bottom with that 4 and the 6, and I can plug them in. So let's say I want to try 6 and 4 here. Alright, let's multiply these out and see what we get. So we have x times negative 4, and that gives us negative 4x. And we have 6 times x, and that gives us 6x. Now 6x plus negative 4x gives us 2x. Is that what we started with? No, we want a negative 2x. Now when I plug these in, you may have been thinking, well, Miss Nicely, what are you doing? You're supposed to put the bigger number here. And you're right. We should have put the bigger number there. But I wanted us to see what it looked like when it didn't work out. So I'm just going to go and erase these real quick. We know that we want 4 and 6, or we think we know that, because we got a 2x, and that's really close. So now let's try switching them. We should put the bigger number here, and then we'll put the 4 there. So now let's redo it. 4 times x gives us 4x, and 6 times x gives us a negative 6x. That gives us negative 2x, and that is what we want. So we have the bigger number, the 6 goes there, and we have the 4. So now that we figured that out, we can go to our last step where we write them side by side, x plus 4 and x minus 6. And then let's multiply them out just in case. So we have x times x gives us x squared. We already know the middle is going to give us a negative 2x. And 4 times negative 6 gives us negative 24. Is that what we started with? Yes, it is. So we know that's correct. And we know these are our factors. And let's just write it down if you want to. If you wrote it down as x minus 6, x plus 4, that's totally fine. Remember, we can move those around, so either one is good. So go ahead and answer the next few questions, and then we will come back together for a few more examples.